I stood in the parking lot of the auto shop my father built with his own two hands, watching my uncle's name being painted over the front sign in fresh black letters. And I remember thinking, this can't be legal. This can't be right. And yet nobody around me seemed to think there was anything left to question. It took me almost 2 years, and one dusty cardboard box nobody had bothered to throw away, to find out I was right all along. Hey everyone, welcome back to Silent Family Stories. If you're new here, this channel is about the quiet moments inside families, the ones that unfold slowly, away from public view, but end up shaping everything that comes after. If that kind of story matters to you, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because there's a lot more of this coming your way. All right, let's get into it. My father wasn't a wealthy man, not in any traditional sense of the word, but he built something that mattered a great deal to him, and honestly, to our entire family. Starting in his mid-20s, working out of a small rented garage, he slowly built an auto repair shop from almost nothing, one satisfied customer at a time, one late night fixing engines by himself long after everyone else had gone home. By the time I was a teenager, that little rented garage had grown into a real, established business, with a steady stream of loyal customers and a small handful of employees who had been with him for years. My uncle, my father's younger brother, worked alongside him for a good portion of that time, though the nature of his involvement shifted quite a bit over the years. In the early days, he helped out here and there, mostly informal labor in exchange for some cash and the occasional favor. As the business grew more established, he took on more consistent responsibilities, handling some of the front desk work, occasionally filling in on repairs when things got busy. He was never, as far as I understood growing up, a formal owner or partner in the business. It was always understood, at least among everyone in the family, that the shop belonged to my father, built through his effort, his risk, and his years of sacrifice. I want to be fair to my uncle here, because I think it's important, especially given how this story eventually unfolds. He wasn't some obviously villainous figure lurking in the background of our family for years. He could be genuinely warm, especially around holidays, always quick with a joke, the kind of uncle who remembered your birthday and always found some small, thoughtful gift, even if money was tight. Complicated people rarely fit neatly into simple categories, and my uncle was no exception to that. My father passed away suddenly when I was 23, from a heart condition that, from what I understand, had gone largely undiagnosed until it was far too late to intervene. It was sudden in the truest sense of the word, no warning, no time to prepare, no final conversations to hold on to afterward. One day he was there, working late at the shop like always, and the next day, he simply wasn't. In the chaotic weeks that followed, my mother, still deep in shock and grief, leaned heavily on my uncle to help manage the practical realities of the business, at least temporarily, while she figured out what to do next. It made sense at the time. He knew the shop, he had experience with the day-to-day operations, and frankly, none of us, myself included, were in any emotional state to be making major business decisions in those early weeks of loss. What was meant to be a temporary arrangement, however, slowly, quietly solidified into something far more permanent than any of us had originally intended, or at least than I had originally understood it to be. Over the following months, my uncle gradually took on more and more control over the business. New equipment purchases were made under his name. Vendor relationships were renegotiated through him directly. Slowly, paperwork started shifting in ways that, at the time, none of us fully understood or thought to question closely. Still deep in the fog of grief that follows losing someone that suddenly. By the time roughly a year had passed, my uncle informed my mother and me, during what I remember as an unusually formal family dinner, that he had taken the necessary steps to formally register the shop under his own name, explaining it as a practical decision meant to protect the business's continuity and stability moving forward. He framed it as something he had done out of necessity, out of love for my father's legacy, insisting it was simply easier for the business to operate under a single, clearly defined owner. especially given ongoing supplier relationships and licensing requirements. I remember sitting at that table, feeling a familiar, uncomfortable knot forming in my stomach, the kind you get when something feels wrong, but you don't yet have the words or the confidence to fully challenge it. My mother, still deeply grieving, exhausted from the emotional weight of the previous year, didn't push back. And at 23, without much business or legal experience myself, I didn't feel equipped to challenge it either, especially against an adult I had known and trusted my entire life. So the shop, the one my father had built from nothing, continued operating, now under my uncle's name, with my involvement gradually fading into something closer to an occasional part-time role, helping out here and there when needed, but with no real ownership stake, no meaningful say in how things were run. For the next couple of years, I told myself I had made peace with it. I focused on building my own career elsewhere, tried not to think too much about the shop whenever I drove past it, the way you try not to look directly at something that still quietly hurts, even years later. My relationship with my uncle during this time remained polite on the surface, holiday gatherings, occasional family events, but there was an unspoken distance there that never fully went away. The turning point came almost by accident, in a way that honestly still feels a little surreal to me even now, looking back on it. My mother had decided to finally clean out our old garage at home, the one where my father used to keep spare parts and old paperwork from the shop's earliest years, boxes that had sat untouched for what felt like ages. She asked if I could come help sort through everything, mostly just to help her decide what to keep and what to finally let go of. Buried near the bottom of one particularly dusty box, beneath old receipts and outdated tax documents, I found a folder I didn't immediately recognize. Inside was a handwritten partnership agreement, dated back to the early years of the shop, back when my uncle had first started helping out more consistently. I sat there on the garage floor for a long time, reading through it carefully. The document, though informal in its language, clearly outlined an agreement between my father and uncle regarding a small percentage of ownership my uncle had been granted in exchange for his early labor and support, a modest, clearly defined minority stake, nowhere close to full ownership of the business. It was signed by both of them, dated years before the more recent paperwork my uncle had used to register the shop entirely under his own name. I want to be careful here, because I am not a lawyer, and I don't want to present anything about how business ownership disputes actually get resolved as something I fully understood at the time, or even fully understand now. What I can tell you honestly is that finding that document changed the entire framework of what I had believed to be true for the past couple of years. According to what my father and uncle had originally agreed upon in writing, my uncle's actual stake in that business had always been meant to be a small minority share, not full, exclusive ownership. I brought the document to my mother first, and I remember her hands actually shaking slightly as she read through it herself. Neither of us had known it existed. My father, from what we could piece together, had likely simply forgotten about that particular piece of paperwork over the years, tucked away and overlooked amid the busy, demanding pace of running a growing business. We eventually consulted with an attorney to understand what our actual options were, given this new information. I won't pretend to walk you through all the legal specifics here, both because I don't fully understand them myself in technical terms, and because I don't want to present anything inaccurately as though I have expertise I simply don't have. What I can tell you is that this discovery opened up a long, difficult process of formally revisiting how the business had been structured, a process that took time, patience, and quite a few uncomfortable conversations within the family before it was eventually resolved. When I finally sat down with my uncle to discuss what we had found, I want to be honest, it was one of the hardest conversations of my adult life. He didn't respond with immediate anger, which somehow made it even more difficult in its own way. Instead, there was a long, heavy silence, followed by what felt like genuine, if belated, acknowledgement that in the disorienting aftermath of my father's sudden death, he had allowed his role in the business to expand in ways that went beyond what had ever actually been agreed upon, telling himself, I think, that he deserved more, given everything he had put into keeping the shop running during those difficult early months. I don't think my uncle set out from the very beginning with some calculated plan to take everything. I think, much like other stories I've shared here before, grief and fear and personal justification quietly shape decisions over time in ways that even the person making them doesn't always fully recognize until much later, if ever. The process of formally correcting the business's ownership structure took the better part of a year to fully sort out, involving paperwork, patient negotiation, and honestly, a fair amount of emotional labor on everyone's part just to keep the broader family relationship intact throughout it. In the end, the ownership was restructured to more accurately reflect what my father had originally intended, with my mother and me holding the majority stake, and my uncle retaining a smaller, though still meaningful ownership percentage, closer to what that original handwritten agreement had actually outlined all those years earlier. My relationship with my uncle today remains, honestly, a work in progress. There are family gatherings where things feel almost entirely normal again, easy conversation, old family jokes returning naturally. And there are still quieter moments where I notice a certain careful distance between us, an awareness on both sides of everything that happened, sitting just beneath the surface of otherwise ordinary conversation. What I've come to understand from all of this is that grief doesn't just affect how we feel. It affects the decisions we make, sometimes in ways that ripple outward for years before anyone fully recognizes their impact. My uncle wasn't purely a villain in this story, and my father wasn't some perfect, infallible business owner either, forgetting as he did about a piece of paperwork that would end up mattering so much years later. Families are made up of flawed, complicated people, doing their best, and sometimes failing each other, often without fully meaning to. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever experienced a similar kind of family business dispute, or discovered something unexpected that changed how you understood a difficult family situation, I would really love to hear about it in the comments below. This community continues to share incredibly powerful stories of its own, and I read every single one that comes through. And if you know someone who might need to hear a story like this today, maybe someone currently navigating a complicated family business situation of their own, please consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes just knowing that someone else has walked a similar road can offer real comfort during an uncertain time. Before I close things out today, I want to leave you with this thought. Important documents, important conversations, important truths, they don't always disappear just because time passes or because nobody happens to be looking for them. Sometimes they simply wait, quietly, until the right moment finally brings them back into the light. If you're currently in the middle of a difficult, unresolved family situation, know that clarity doesn't always arrive on the timeline we would prefer, but that doesn't mean it isn't still out there waiting to be found. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. If it meant something to you, make sure you're subscribed so you catch the next one. Drop a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves and take care of the truths worth holding on to.